So, welcome back. It was a really nice presentation from Daniel Plemons, trying to figure out what would be the next hammer, or if you prefer, pencil for XR creators, for next generations or our generation of XR creators. And again, talking about user experience, we can now start to make user research on them, because the ecosystem is, even if slowly, is growing. So we have a lot of material that we can share with the users and get feedbacks from them. So this introduces the topic of the next session. That our next speaker is Anna Scarfield from eBay, and she will talk with us about user research for spatial computing experiences. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, and thanks for the introduction. I'm going to be talking to you about doing research with users with spatial computing experiences. My name is Hannah Scarfield. This is a photo of me at eBay's Design Summit a few years back, looking really tiny on stage next to some digital stormtroopers. My designer friend added these AR stickers. He obviously thought my talk wasn't interesting enough. I've spent my career understanding how humans will use new technology so that we can design the best new experiences. My background is in human-computer interaction, ergonomics, and film, and I've spent time both as an interaction designer and a design researcher in commercial product innovation. I started back in the days when mobile was an emerging technology and worked through the birth of smartphones. I spent some time working on Internet of Things and smart automotive technologies, and more recently researching consumer virtual reality and augmented reality experiences on both mobile phones and headsets. Running user research is the best way to ensure the success of an interactive experience. Hopefully you know that, and that's why you're here. Observing people and interviewing them and understanding how well the experience meets its goals. But researching new technology platforms is a little bit more complex. It requires new methods, new principles, and you often need to get creative and experiment. So here are my tips for running your own user research for your spatial computing experiences. Number one, my first tip, is a good tip for designing any experience. Know your target audience. And I highlight this because often the people comfortable around using new technology are the early adopters like we are. They are happy to experiment and fail when using experiences. And with spatial computing, they're often also experienced gamers. So early adopters may be your target audience, and that's great if it is, but often it's a more general population that you want to be looking at and recruiting for. I'm often aiming at a general, broad population, so I wanted to make sure I could target people who weren't early adopters and gamers. We would ask people some questions around their attitude to technology and gaming. And another great thing to do is learn to identify different users just through watching them and their behaviors. So I would use this Conker's game on the HoloLens that you might recognize, and I tried to assess how comfortable people were with games. We could then make sure we had enough research participants who are a little bit more hesitant to experiment, and perhaps even gave up on the game completely, because we wanted to be able to understand how well our experience worked for them too. Then it's about understanding the context in which people are going to be using your experience. Now, this is particularly tricky with spatial computing with consumers. Often the user's context is unknown. We don't know where they are. We don't know how big the space is, what the space has in it, what's around them. And one of the things we also need to realize is that we're often designing and developing experiences in office spaces. And maybe you're designing for an office worker, but I was designing for users who are often more likely to be in a home environment. My good designer friend, Teresa Chiswick at Stream, talks about being mindful of the mobility of our users when you're placing digital content around them. You're sitting there thinking about your design in an office chair, which probably has wheels. It means you can spin around really easily and look at things. But where will your user be? Maybe they're on a normal chair that's fixed. Maybe they have a table in front of them. Maybe they're on a couch or in a wheelchair or lying down. We need to take this all into account when designing the digital space in front of them and getting them to move around. The best way to learn about real spaces is just to go out and visit your users in their spaces and spend time observing how they use their space. Or you can set up spaces that mimic your user's context. So we have 2 studios set up as lounges, and one was deliberately pretty small. We wanted to see how people would cope with furniture being close around them. And at the very least, you could get people to tell you about their spaces, photograph them, video them. It's all just about helping you imagine their context as you're developing experiences for them. So my third tip concerns the difficulty in creating quick prototypes for spatial computing. When I was first exploring augmented reality, there wasn't really any prototyping software. We now have tools like Torch and Wireframe, but we still struggle to prototype some of the smart artificial intelligence elements of experiences. So we have to get creative. Wizard of Oz is a term we use to describe when we fake experiences to get feedback on them, when we're not yet able to build a fully working prototype to put in front of people. I've used this technique to mimic elements created through computer vision, when we wanted to show the system recognizing objects in front of the user before we could actually make it happen. So we placed objects and placed digital elements and kind of fixed around them. But when the user passed the camera over them, it looked like they just appeared. So it was a great way to kind of show how the experience can probably look like without being able to build it. You can also get low fidelity with your prototypes. I've used role play and acting to explore some interaction concepts. I've acted out sound elements and feedback, and we've made paper prototypes, we've got crafty, or we get people to create their own paper UI elements. Sometimes the lo-fi approach really helps encourage your participants to give honest feedback as well, because they know that you're early on in the process. The important thing is that we don't have to wait until the experience is fully working to start learning. My fourth tip is a common technique for researching future concepts, and this is helping people imagine themselves in the future. The spatial computing headsets are currently working with are pretty large. They're often worn for a limited amount of time, but we're designing and developing with the assumption that these devices will shrink and comfort levels will improve and experiences will be longer and more ubiquitous. So we want to try and acknowledge the current hardware and fatigue and take that into account when we're interpreting people's movements and feedback. One thing we try and do is we help people imagine the future, the future when the device is smaller, it's easier to wear, it's easier to move around with. And we can use existing spatial computing experiences to paint a picture of that future. What might be the normal everyday things we do using spatial computing? Imagining persistent digital content in your home, things like that. So you can also use future personas, descriptions of people in the future, their lives and their homes. All of this will help move on from some of the feedback that you're getting about the devices right now. My fifth tip is around design principles. I love creating design principles from the research insights that I've collected. I think it's a great way of distilling all the knowledge I've gathered into guardrails that really help the designers navigate all the decisions they need to make every day. Now, with new technology, we often don't have those principles or benchmarks for success. So, when we were starting, some of the device manufacturers had some design principles, but there weren't any public principles around commerce for augmented reality, for example. So you can dive into existing principles and interpolate. Here we have Dieter Rams' 10 Principles of Good Design, and then we have some anthropometrics from ergonomics. But really the best way is to take these and then explore and create your own principles. We used a lot of existing experiences to learn about how to design on this platform before we'd even started developing. So one example was a principle around altering real surfaces. This is a Robo-Raid game on the HoloLens. You may recognize it. This is an example of where digital content appears to manipulate real surfaces, creating holes in the wall. We got people to play another game on a different platform that did this, but the digital creatures retreated further into the imaginary hole, meaning that unfortunately a couple of participants punched and hit the wall trying to get at them. So we can then have a design principle that, if we're trying to encourage people to interact with moving elements, that they don't get too far behind a very real hard surface that people could hit. Comparing experiences like that is a great way to gather principles. We had people play Angry Birds on Magic Leap and found that some people, often the non-gamers, would struggle to discover that the controller in their hand was the slingshot, because they would be holding it down by their side and out of their field of view. But in another Magic Leap game, Dr. Grobot's Invaders, the user needed to find and pick up the object that then got assigned to the controller. So there was no confusion about where that object was. So that means we can then create a principle around objects getting visibly assigned to a handheld controller to make it easy for everyone to know where it is. My sixth tip is common to any new technology. If you were around in the early days of smartphones, we were often having to tell people not to port web experiences to mobile, but instead be thoughtful about what was appropriate for this new platform and what new capabilities we should be taking advantage of. It's the same with spatial computing. We need to be thoughtful about the UI patterns and elements that we bring over to this new platform. And we need to keep in mind the new capabilities of this technology that we should take advantage of. I mostly say this so I don't have to glare at a large floating keyboard to do text input ever again. On a VR project I worked with, this was on the Oculus Go, you can see it here. We had a guiding principle of constantly asking if we needed the UI we were designing. This is just really a great principle for design, full stop, but we wanted to push at our existing 2D interaction patterns and not just assume that we would port these over to a 3D space. You want to take advantage of some existing paradigms. It can help users understand how to interact with the UI, but we have more space and we have different gestures and inputs. We can use natural physics or we can defy it. We don't have to stick with the old. My seventh tip is about getting creative. We're not able to use the same methods we do for researching mobile and web technologies, but let's get excited about trying new things. In the early days, we can always stream the participants' view and see what they were seeing. I spent a lot of time asking people, so tell me what you're looking at right now, or describe what you're seeing. And we ended up experimenting with eye tracking technology, which gave us a great added advantage of being able to see where our users were looking. And devices now are more sophisticated, but do consider how you can stream the user's view if you're building your own technology. Being able to follow along with your users is really important. It helps you analyze so much more than just watching them and asking them questions. And the great thing about being able to stream is it opens you up to potentially doing remote research over video, which is really important right now when we're all trying to work remotely. You'll be able to get a rich understanding without them being in the room with you. And back to our second tip, you can get to watch them in their own space. Another way I got creative was around trying to assess comfort beyond just asking people to self-report their comfort levels. So this is a video session from people using a VR experience. I then sped up the videos because it does a great job of accentuating the movement. You can mark the video so you know when people are exploring certain parts of your experience. And it helps you develop success criteria for movement. Maybe there's a range of movement, or there's a certain amount of repetitive movements that you want to allow. My last tip is another tip for understanding future use of new technology, and that is observing usage over time. there aren't that many people, members of the general public, say, who are using these devices. So often we can really only get feedback from people we show the experience to. We have to follow along with our whole unboxing and onboarding experiences. And this means that we're getting feedback on initial experiences with gestures and controls that they might be unfamiliar with. And we try and understand if any issues they're having are just part of getting to grips with this new technology, or if this is something that we need to address. But really, the ideal is observing your participants after they've had that first experience. We often have panels of research participants who we meet for multiple sessions over time, so that we might watch them with their first experience and then follow them as they get familiar with the technology. You might watch them with existing experiences and then introduce them to your experience. And even better, if you can, is to be able to give them the experience and the device, if appropriate, and let them take it home and use it for a few weeks. You can get them to keep a diary of their experiences, prompt them to explore things, and all of this really helps you get to understand how well your experience will do once people have got to grips with the technology. So here are my 8 tips. Research in this field is advancing fast in academia and the innovation labs of big technology companies. But I hope these tips can help you put your work in the hands of users and learn to build brilliant human-centered experiences. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm now open to taking questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was super interesting. And we are a bit out of time, so I would like to ask you if you have something to add to your to comment to your presentation.
It just made me think about one more thing, which is just remembering how comfortable we all are with this technology, and that your customers may not be, or your users may not be. So as much as you can, understand your biases and all of the knowledge you have. And that's a good reason for going out and finding people who are different from you and more average users to see how they can interact with your experiences.
That's really interesting. And I see, no, we don't have questions. And yes, I really appreciated your pointing in being creative in deciding what data to collect, because as devices become more complex, the of data that one could analyze can grow exponentially. So if you have a last suggestion about this, how to address exactly the data collection
yeah, it's a difficult one, because I never normally like to tell people to, grab as much data as possible, because, a lot of that you might not need. But I think now, especially with research, just experimenting, trying new things, thinking that like no idea is a bad idea in terms of what data that you collect, especially when we're involving sensors and computer vision and all of this complexity. So yeah, I think I'm kind of reversing my thing about being thoughtful about data collection and just experimenting and see what makes sense, especially when we're all might be designing for different purposes, from commerce to immersive experiences. Your particular area might need a particular type of data that another area doesn't. So I think it's all about experimenting at this point.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And now, remaining on experimentations, I would say, and with an experimental attitude, we can move to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Anna. I'm sure all the people in the chat will be very happy to get in touch with you, and we have a really powerful networking platform in our new online edition of the AWE. And so thank you very much for being our guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was an honor. Bye.